Okay, so in the third part of the video, let's look at homeostasis and the different glands that are that has an actually that acts on maintaining homeostatic balance in the body. So previously we discussed about the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pituitary hormones. And the pituitary hormones, most of them are actually stimulating hormones that affect the actions of the other endocrine glands. So let's look at the other endocrine glands. So first off on the list, we have the adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are located on top of kidneys. They are basically glands that are sitting at the top. They are like the hats of the kidneys. So we have actually, you can divide the adrenal gland into two. We have the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. So when we talk about cortex, it's the outer portion, and the medulla is the inner portion. So the outer portion, the adrenal cortex, they secrete glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and small amounts of estrogen and testosterone. Whereas the medulla, the inner part, are the ones that are responsible for the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, let's look at those hormones. Let's look closely at those hormones. You have the glucocorticoids. These are the group of hormones involved in glucose metabolism. So, cortisol is a type of glucocorticoid which is similar to glucagon. So that, such that if you remember, the actions of glucagon increases the sugar level of the blood. So, it has an opposite function to insulin. But cortisol, aside from basically the function of cortisol is that it promotes the use of fats and proteins as energy sources. So cortisol and glucagon are usually secreted. They are usually secreted at the same time, or most of the time you will see cortisol at the same time as glucagon when they are being activated. That is because these hormones are activated when there is a lack of sugar. So there are too low sugar level in the blood. And for the case of the cortisol, because of the sugar level is low, cortisol, instead of directly increasing the sugar level of the blood, unlike that is the action of glucagon actually, cortisol actually looks at what is the effect of a low sugar level. Reminders, just to look at it in a larger picture, a low sugar level means that you have low energy reserve in the blood. So basically, your tissues and bodies are receiving inadequate nutrients or sugars, and because of low sugar, it cannot produce enough energy, especially for the case of the brain cells, which must have a consistent and steady supply of sugar for energy, because again, sugar is metabolically speaking, it's the source of energy. So a low sugar level means a low energy availability being delivered to the cells. So cortisol is the one that solves this low energy supply by promoting the utilization of the fats and the proteins as alternative energy sources. So cortisol allows our body to utilize the fats and the proteins instead of utilizing sugar. So if you want to slim down, basically you need to stimulate cortisol production. Cortisol is also an anti-inflammatory hormone that helps your body handle stress. Basically, adrenal glands are known as the gland that helps in handling stress, because most of the hormones that it produces, the glucocorticoids and the epinephrine and norepinephrine, they are involved in hormones involved in stress and of course fight and flight responses. Anyway, going back. So we have mineralocorticoids, which are the group of hormones that monitor and maintain ion balance. So an example of that is the aldosterone that regulates sodium and potassium levels, which in turn affects water balance. Why does it affect water balance? Because of course osmosis. So you have our body is maintaining water through osmotic diffusion, passive diffusion, mostly passive diffusion, and this is highly affected by how much ions are present on which side of the membrane. Now, aldosterone is released when sodium or water levels are low or potassium levels are high. So that means aldosterone prevents dehydration, and it retains sodium in our body, whereas it's also released when potassium levels are high. So that means it releases potassium to the urine. And a small amount of the sex hormones are also released by the adrenal cortex. So these are the testosterone and estrogen, which work to help maintain secondary male and female sex characteristics. So other non-steroid hormones are produced by the adrenal medulla. So let's look at the medulla this time. So the adrenal medulla produces epinephrine and norepinephrine, which participate in the fight or flight response and increase heart rate and the respiration rate. So these are the intense stress hormones. Anyway, so we talked about homeostatic, the balance, the hormones are tightly regulated, and a small, any deviations from that very tight regulation causes a host of diseases. And the diseases of the endocrine system is specific to the type of hormone, to the gland and the type of hormone affected. So we have Cushing's syndrome, which is the hypersecretion of the adrenal cortex, which put excess cortisol in the blood. So even though cortisol helps you slim down by helping you utilize fats, excess cortisol results in Cushing's syndrome, which is what is the effect of that? You will have the round, flashed, moon face, a deposit of fat at the back of the neck, and thin arms and legs, because the effect of too much cortisol is that it breaks down too much of the protein. So you have thin arms and legs, and redistributes body fat. So that means you will have body fat in parts of the body where you don't want or is not supposed to have that much amount of fat, such as, well, basically your face and the back of the neck. So it also causes blood chemistry imbalance, especially the glucose imbalance, which in turn lead to hypertension and mood swings. So hypertension is affected by the glucose level of the blood, because the high sugar level in the blood, if there are too many solutes in the blood becomes viscous. So the tendency is that the heart has to work harder to pump the blood. So there you go, hypertension. So, and then, aside from that, the bones become weak because, again, mineralocorticoids. Now, Addison's disease is caused by hyposecretion of glucocorticoids and aldosterone. So, if we have the hypersecretion, too much secretion, we have the hypo or too low secretion of this time, glucocorticoids and aldosterone, usually due to autoimmune destruction of the adrenal cortex. The usual cause is autoimmune. When we talk about autoimmune diseases, these are diseases that are caused by your own immune system attacking your body. So instead of pathogens destroying your body, it's basically your own body that attacks your body. So that is autoimmune diseases and autoimmune destruction. So in this case, the adrenal cortex is being attacked by your white blood cells. So ending, this ends in, of course, destruction of the tissue. So there will be lack of tissues that will secrete the hormones. So the resultant lack of glucocorticoids causes mental slowness, anorexia, weight loss, and bronzing of the skin. So that's Addison's disease. So that's for the adrenal gland. So let's look at the next gland in our list, which is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland are well known for regulating metabolic balance. So the metabolic rate is controlled by the thyroid gland, directly controlled. So we have two hormones that acts on the regulation of the metabolic rate, the T3 and the T4. T3 or triiodothyronine and the T4 thyroxine. So these are involved in regulating basal metabolic rate and helps determine how quickly and efficiently we use energy. So thyroxine T4 is responsible for the cellular conversion of glucose to ATP. So why is metabolic rate important? So let's give you an example. I believe there is always that one person in our circle or in our circle of acquaintances that he always eats a lot. So that means he eats triple 3 cups of rice for every meal. He eats a lot. He can solo a pizza in the canteen. But even though he eats a lot, he usually orders a double portion of the meal during lunch breaks. Even though he eats a lot like that, he maintains a very skinny and lanky figure. So you can, part of the reason might be because of its metabolic rate. So perhaps his or her body, despite eating a large amount, he maintains a petite and skinny well, he doesn't get fat. The end of that is he doesn't get fat. It's because his metabolic rate is high. So that means its body readily converts the nutrients it intakes into energy. So, and that control is basically, that level of regulation is controlled by the thyroid hormones, the T3 and the T4. Now, any diseases affecting this the thyroid gland are hypothyroidism, whereas hypo-low, this is occurs when the thyroid secretes too little T3 and T4. So, we have congenital hypothyroidism, which occurs from birth. When we say congenital, because these are usually diseases that are observed at the time of birth. So this occurs from birth and can lead to mental development delays and stunted bone growth unless treated immediately. Because again, hypothyroidism, that means your body cannot utilize the energy it gets efficiently. So what's the ending of that? The ending of that, or the effect of that, is of course, you will have a low energy supply in your body despite eating a lot. And if you have a low energy supply, you will have, especially for this congenital hypothyroidism, whereas your body needs energy to grow and develop, you will have, of course, stunted growth and development. And then we have myxedema. This results when thyroid works normally at birth but fails to secrete enough hormones in the adult life. So this causes low heart rate, low body temperature, dry hair and skin, muscular weakness, general tiredness, and then tendency to gain weight. Because why do we have why tendency to gain weight? Because it eats you eat. For example, people with myxedema, they eat normally, but they cannot process the food. So what happens to the food that they eat? They're just stored as, well, fats. So they tend to gain weight. Now, these are just some. So how about hyperthyroidism? Hyperthyroidism occurs when thyroid oversecretes the thyroid hormone. So hyper is over the top. So the metabolic rate can be 60 to 100% above normal. So example of that is exophthalmos, where there is a fluid build up behind the eyes and may cause the eyes to pop from their sockets. So basically, this is, you can see, what the term here is nakaluwa ang mata. Okay? So this making the whites of the eyes visible all around the iris. And then we also have diseases, the Graves' disease, which occurs more often in females than in males. So this is an increased production of the THS that causes the thyroid to enlarge and become visible over the surface of the larynx, a condition known as goiter. So this case, Graves' disease, is mostly the culprit is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland releases too much TSH, and the thyroid is trying its best to keep up with the demand, and so in order to keep up production, it increases its mass. So you have enlargement of the thyroid, but it cannot produce the T3 and T4 hormone because you lack iodine. So one of the way to prevent goiter, that's why one of the well-known ways to prevent goiter is to add iodine to your diet, because sometimes the reason for the pituitary gland to always tell the thyroid hormone to produce and release more T3 and T4 is because you lack the T3 and T4 hormones. And why do you lack that? Because you lack iodine in your diet, because iodine is needed to produce T3 and T4. So anyway, that's one of the possible causes or mechanism of that. Now, aside from the T3 and T4, we also have calcitonin. Calcitonin, produced in the thyroid gland, it's produced, or it stimulates calcium uptake by osteoblast. So, in the bones, we have two types of cells. We have the osteoblast and the osteoclast. So, the osteoblasts are the builders. So, they build up bone mass, bone tissue, by depositing calcium from the blood to the bones. So, basically, the bones not only serve as structural support for our body, but it also serve as somewhat a calcium bank. So it's the deposit. This is where calcium is deposited by the body. Now, so as I was saying, we have osteoblasts, the bone cells that are responsible for building up bones and depositing calcium from the bloodstream to the bones. And then the other type is osteoclast. Osteoclast performs the opposite function of osteoclast perform the opposite function of osteoblast. So if the osteoblast B for building up, osteoclast for basically it breaks down, or basically it breaks down. So it withdraws the calcium from the bones and releases it to the bloodstream. So basically, it's the one that makes the bones brittle. But why do we have cells that make our bones brittle? This is because, again, the bone is the bank, the calcium bank of the body. So remember, if we have, going by that analogy, so let's say we have a savings bank. So we deposit our savings from the bank to the bank. So we build up our savings or our bank savings. But when we need in times of need, for example, during this COVID pandemic, a lot of us have most people have lost most of their livelihood. There's basically you need the end point is that you need your savings, so you withdraw your savings. So basically, the osteoclast allows us in times of calcium, the need of calcium. So if you have low calcium in the blood, one way to increase the calcium level in the blood is to get calcium from the bones. So osteoclast is the one responsible for withdrawing the saved calcium in the bones and releasing it to the bloodstream. So basically, calcitonin is one of the hormones responsible for maintaining calcium balance. In this case, it lowers calcium levels in the body. Now, if we have a calcitonin, the hormone that lowers the calcium level, we must have another hormone that does the opposite effect. So in this case, we have the PTH. So this is basically the calcium homeostasis. So let's say, for instance, you have a high level of calcium in the blood. So if you tend to drink a lot of milk and food with high levels of calcium, of course, you will have a high calcium level. So this is not good for the body. If you have a very high calcium level in the blood, you do not want that, because calcium helps accelerate or is responsible for the formation of kidney stone. So a very high amounts of calcium in the blood, the tendency is that you might develop kidney stones. And we all know from our previous lecture in the urinary system, kidney stones are, well, basically they destroy the nephrons in the kidneys. So anyway, you have a high level of calcium, so you do not want that. So in order to maintain balance, you need to lower calcium level. So your thyroid gland will secrete your calcitonin hormone. So the calcitonin inhibits the osteoclast. So it tells the withdrawing, the breaking down cells of the bones to stop. Well, not exactly stop, but slow down, and stimulates the osteoblast. So it enhances, encourages the action of the building up cells of the bone, so the osteoblast. So the osteoblast will then deposit calcium from the bloodstream to the bones, and so your calcium, the calcium level in the blood will decrease. Now, if it decreases too much, another problem. So you do not want a very low calcium level in our body. So when we have a very low calcium level in our body, what happens next? So, well, of course, we stop the production of calcitonin because it will only lower. The calcitonin serves to lower calcium levels, but we already have a low calcium level. So what next? So this time you will need your parathyroid glands. So parathyroid gland are the glands at the back of the neck. So actually not exactly back of the neck, but at the back of your if your thyroid gland embraces basically your larynx, the parathyroid gland is usually at the back of the larynx. So the parathyroid gland releases another hormone. This is the parathyroid hormone, or the PTH. So the PTH has an opposite effect to calcitonin. So for PTH, it promotes the release of calcium from the bone to the blood. So the action of PTH is to tell the osteoclast to break down more bones, and to tell the osteoblast to slow down the formation of bones. So what happens is that due to breaking down of the bones, the calcium in the bones are released to the bloodstream. So your low level of calcium in the blood will increase. So aside from that, aside from the PTH, aside from that action of the PTH also stimulate the kidney to release a hormone called calcitriol. Calcitriol, the work of calcitriol is on the absorption of calcium from the foods. So it increases your blood calcium level. So basically that is so increasing increased absorption and increase and withdrawing the calcium from the bones will help increase the level of calcium in the blood. So basically, that's how you do homeostasis. Homeostasis does not mean you only push the system on one end. So that means you must have a regulatory mechanism such that you can push your system from whether to the left or to the right, increase or decrease. So let's take a closer look at the parathyroid glands. So the parathyroid glands secrete your PTH. So again, PTH has a reverse effect to calcitonin. If you have a hypoparathyroidism, that is, you have too little PTH in the blood, you will have, of course, since the PTH is responsible for increasing the blood level, the calcium levels in the blood, too little of that, of course, you will have a low blood calcium level. So that means what happens when you have too low calcium levels in the blood? What results is that your nerves will depolarize. So the problem will be on the nerves. The nerves will depolarize and cause muscles to contract, resulting in twitches, spasm, and tetany. So that's the problem with too low blood calcium level. And then we have hyperparathyroidism, occurs when there's too much PTH in the blood. Again, if we have a too high calcium level, of course, because of the too much PTH. Again, remember, PTH stimulates the breaking down of the bones. So ending in having a soft, brittle bones because too little calcium. And also the formation of kidney stones, fatigue, and personality changes. Personality changes, these are basically moodiness. Because there was a study that correlates your happiness level. Also, happy people have high amounts of calcium. Moody people, those who tend to brood, were said to have low calcium levels. Anyway, that is a correlation study. Okay. Now, moving on, let's look at the thymus and the pineal glands. So, the thymus gland is located in the anterior mediastinum. So, when we say anterior mediastinum, anterior means in front. Mediastinum, media is middle. Stinum refers to the sternum. Basically, this is the breastbone. So, taken together, in front of the middle breastbone. So, that's the location of your thymus gland. So, this is important during infancy and childhood where your immune system is developing because the thymus gland is particularly well known as the site where your T cell, your one type of white blood cell, is matures. So, the T cell, or rather, the T cell is responsible for usually it's involved in viral action. So, it helps fight off viruses, or rather cells infected with viruses, as well as cancer cells. So the thymus is the site where the T cells, which is part of the immune system, the T cells are matured, and it secretes hormones thymosin and thymopoietin, which is responsible for the maturation of the T cells. So, when you are a child, you have a very large thymus gland, around 70 grams. And as you grow older, it shrinks down until it's around 3 grams in the elderly people. So, the declining thymic functional tissue compromises the overall functioning of the immune system. But it's normal for the thymus to shrink down as you grow older. Because as a child, you need a large, because your immune system is still developing. That's why you need a large thymus gland. As you grow older, there is a less and less need for, because of course, your immune system have already developed. And then, aside from the thymus, we have the pineal gland. The pineal gland is located in the brain and is more active during infancy and childhood because one of the action of the pineal gland, or one of the hormones released by the pineal gland, is melatonin, which induces sleepiness. That is why pineal gland is linked to the circadian rhythm. So, basically, the sleep and wake cycle of the body is controlled by this pineal gland. So, the pineal gland is indirectly sensitive to light as they react to nerve impulses carried on the adjacent optic nerve. So, the pineal gland is located near, or it's actually neighbors with the optic nerve, and if the optic nerve is active, that means, for example, during nighttime, you tend to read or, well, of course, look into your smartphone, play games in your smartphone late into the evening, the glare from the screen of your smartphone will trick your, of course, you are seeing the glare, so your eyes are very active. So what happens is that, of course, since your eyes are active, your optic nerve is active, and so your pineal gland is also active. So that means that gives the signal to the pineal gland that it is still daytime. It's not yet time to sleep. So ending in, especially you will see here studies during the advent of the smartphone. There were studies that links the use of smartphone at night with insomnia. So you cannot sleep well if you are using smartphone at night. And this is actually backed by this mechanism, which is that the pineal gland is known to be sensitive to light. And if we have, even at the middle of the night, we have our lights on, we are looking at the glare from our smartphone at night, it will trick our pineal gland into thinking it's still day, so it won't release melatonin. Ending in, we will get insomnia. So that's basically it. Okay? So, in the next part of this video, we will discuss about the pancreas.